stand on the flight deck of the USS George H.W. Bush, the final and most refined vessel of the Nimitz Class. The year is 2024. You are wearing a cranial helmet and a float coat surrounded by the smell of burnt kerosene and sea salt. Beneath your feet, you feel a vibration that shakes the fillings in your teeth. A steam piston charged with 500 pounds per square inch of pressure is holding back a 30-ton fighter jet. The shooter touches the deck. The button is pressed. A cloud of white steam erupts from the track. The deck lurches. The jet disappears off the bow, leaving behind a trail of vapor and a smell of hot hydraulic fluid. This is the way the U.S. Navy has launched aircraft for 70 years. It is violent, it is hot, and it is reliable. Now blink your eyes and step onto the deck of the USS Gerald R. The same jet is hooked up. But there is no steam, there is no shuddering vibration of boilers reaching critical pressure. There is only a low electric hum like a massive transformer waking up. The shooter presses a digital touchscreen. There is no explosion. The jet accelerates down the track with a terrifying silent smoothness pushed by an invisible magnetic hand. It feels unnatural. It feels like science fiction. But this is the new reality. We are looking at a battle between two generations of titans. On one side, the USS George H.W. Bush, the final and most perfect evolution of the Nimitz Class, a ship built on the hard-learned lessons of the Cold War. On the other side, the USS Gerald R. a $13 billion gamble on the future, a ship that replaced steam with electricity and hydraulics with software. One is a muscle car, the other is a supercomputer built for war. Today on Tactical Chow, we are going to pit these two leviathans against each other. We will tear open the decks to show you the difference between the brutal steam catapults and the futuristic EMALS. We will descend into the reactor departments to compare the aging A4W nuclear cores with the powerhouse A1B reactors that could light up Las Vegas. We will explore the crew's living quarters to see if the Ford's gender-neutral bathrooms and improved air conditioning are actually better than the crowded berthings of the Bush. And we will answer the ultimate question: is the new technology worth the billions, or was the old way better? To understand this rivalry, you have to understand the philosophy of design. The USS George H.W. Bush is the 10th and final ship of the Nimitz Class. When it was commissioned in 2009, it represented the pinnacle of 20th century naval engineering. It is a ship of mechanical linkages, hydraulic fluid, and high-pressure steam. It is built to be fixed with a wrench and a sledgehammer. It carries a crew of nearly 5,500 sailors because it requires sheer manpower to operate. It is the old guard, tough, proven, and dirty. The USS Gerald R. commissioned in 2017, is a radical departure. It looks similar from the outside, but inside it is a different species. The Navy stripped out the steam pipes. They replaced miles of copper cabling with fiber optics. They reduced the crew size by nearly 1,000 sailors, betting that automation could replace sweat. The Ford is designed to generate 30% more flights per day than the Bush. But this leap forward came with a price: years of delays, broken elevators, and a toilet system that keeps clogging. This is not just a comparison of steel, it is a comparison of ideologies. The most dramatic difference, the one that pilots feel in their bones, is the launch system. The Bush uses the C-13 Mod 2 steam catapult. This system is legendary. It takes steam from the ship's nuclear reactors, pipes it up to the flight deck, and stores it in massive accumulators. When the valve opens, that steam drives a piston down a football field-length tube. It is brutal physics. The acceleration is not linear. It hits the pilot with a massive jolt at the start, subjecting the airframe to immense stress. The system is also maintenance-heavy. It requires fresh water, thousands of gallons of it. If the ship's evaporators go down, the catapults stop. It requires a team of snipes below decks to grease the pistons and seal the steam leaks. It is hot, dangerous work. The Ford abandons steam. It uses EMALS, the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System. Think of it as a railgun for airplanes. A linear induction motor uses massive surges of electricity to create a traveling magnetic wave. The shuttle rides this wave. The advantage is control. With steam, you basically have high power and low power. With EMALS, the operator can dial in the exact weight of the aircraft. The acceleration is smooth. It doesn't beat up the jets. It puts less stress on the pilots. And critically, it doesn't need fresh water. It just needs power. But there is a catch. If the main electrical grid of the ship takes a hit, the catapults are dead. On the Bush, you can still launch on residual steam pressure. On the Ford, you are relying on software, and as anyone with a computer knows, software crashes. But launching is optional, landing is mandatory. This brings us to the arresting gear. On the Bush, catching a jet is done with the Mark 7 Mod 3 arresting engine. This is a hydraulic machine. A steel cable crosses the deck, the jet hooks it. The cable pulls a piston through a cylinder of fluid to absorb the energy. It is simple, effective, and violent. The system has to be reset manually after every trap. It limits how fast you can land planes. The Ford uses AAG Advanced Arresting Gear. It looks like a giant water turbine mixed with an electric motor. When the jet hits the wire, a water twister absorbs the initial shock, and then huge electric motors spin in reverse to slow the plane down smoothly. It is software controlled. It can catch a heavy drone or a light fighter jet without needing a mechanical reset. The Navy promised it would be safer and faster. In reality, during the early trials, the AAG failed constantly. It broke down so often that the Navy considered ripping it out. Today it works, but the sailors on the Bush still look at it with suspicion. Hydraulics don't have glitches. Computers do. The heart of these ships lies deep below the waterline, the nuclear reactors. The Bush is powered by two A4W reactors. These are 1970s technology refined over decades. They are reliable workhorses generating about 550 megawatts of thermal energy. They provide steam for the catapults and electricity for the ship, but the ship is maxed out. If you plug in a new laser weapon or a high-powered radar, the Bush's grid would struggle. It is like an old house where you can't run the microwave and the hair dryer at the same time. The Ford uses two A1B reactors. These are monsters. They are smaller, simpler, and require fewer sailors to operate, yet they generate 3 times the electrical power of the Nimitz Class. Why? Because the Ford is future-proofed. The Navy plans to install directed energy weapons like lasers and heavy electronic jamming pods in the future. The Ford has the juice to run them. The Bush does not. Also, because the Ford doesn't use steam for the catapults, the reactor piping is simpler. There are fewer steam lines running through the ship, which means the ship is cooler and quieter. On the Bush, the steam tunnels are 110-degree sweatboxes. On the Ford, the engineering spaces are air-conditioned server rooms. Now let's talk about the sortie generation rate. This is the kill metric. How fast can you rearm and relaunch a jet? The design of the Ford moved the island, the control tower, further aft and made it smaller. This created a massive area of open deck space in front of the tower known as the pit stop. On the Bush, jets have to taxi around the tower, creating a bottleneck. On the Ford, they land, taxi to the pit stop, get refueled and rearmed, and taxi straight to the catapults. The Navy claims this layout allows the Ford to launch 160 sorties a day sustained, compared to 120 on the Bush. In a war with China, those extra 40 flights a day could mean the difference between victory and defeat. But to rearm a jet, you need bombs, and this brings us to the weapons elevators. This was the Ford's biggest scandal. On the Bush, the weapons elevators are mechanical cables and pulleys with closing hatch doors. They are slow. They move about 10,000 pounds at 100 feet per minute. They break, but sailors can fix them. The Ford installed advanced weapons elevators. These use electromagnetic motors, maglev technology, to move 24,000 pounds at 150 feet per minute. They don't have cables. They travel through blast-proof shafts. They are incredible when they work. For the first 2 years of the Ford's life, none of the elevators worked. The ship deployed without the ability to bring bombs from the magazines to the flight deck. It was a national embarrassment. Sailors were using pulleys and ropes. Today, they are certified and functional, moving ordnance twice as fast as the Bush. But the memory of that failure haunts the program. Let's move to the human element, crew life. If you are a sailor, which ship do you want to be on? The Bush carries nearly 5,500 people. It is crowded. The berthing compartments are the classic coffin lockers stacked 3 high. The ventilation is old. It smells of fuel and sweat. The heads utilize the old-style gravity drains and vacuum collection, which are prone to backing up. The Ford carries about 4,500 people. That is nearly 1,000 fewer sailors. This means more space. The Ford was designed with quality of life in mind. The berthing compartments are smaller, maxing out at 30 people instead of 100, which means less noise. The air conditioning is vastly superior due to the excess electrical power. However, there is a controversy: the toilets. The Ford is the first carrier with gender-neutral heads. There are no urinals on the entire ship. Every toilet is a sit-down stall. The idea was to allow the Navy to reassign bathrooms to men or women as the crew composition changed. But there is a problem. The vacuum flushing system on the Ford was designed like a commercial airliner. The pipes are narrow. Sailors flush things they shouldn't. The system clogs constantly. The Navy has spent $400,000 per acid flush to clear the lines. On the Bush, the pipes are wider and more forgiving. Also, a smaller crew on the Ford sounds great until you realize there is still the same amount of ship to clean. Fewer sailors means more work per person. The sweepers' shifts on the Ford are longer. There are fewer bodies to chip paint, fewer bodies to move boxes. The Ford sailors are often more exhausted than their counterparts on the Bush. Look at the tower of the Bush. It is covered in spinning dishes and antennas. This is the AN/SPS-48 and AN/SPS-49 radar suite. It is mechanical. It requires maintenance. It has a refresh rate, the time it takes the dish to spin around. Now look at the Ford. The tower is smooth. It has massive, flat gray panels bolted to the sides. This is the dual-band radar. It has no moving parts. It scans the sky electronically instantly. It can track a hypersonic missile and a small drone simultaneously. It integrates with the ship's defense missiles automatically. The Bush sees the world in blips. The Ford sees the world in high-definition 3D. The dual-band radar allows the Ford to act as the air traffic controller for the entire battle group, managing hundreds of targets with a fraction of the personnel required on the Bush. The Bush is built with high-yield 80 and 100 steel. It has Kevlar armor over vital spaces. It is a tank. The Ford is built with new, classified alloys that are lighter and stronger, but the biggest difference is the electrical grid. On the Bush, if a steam pipe bursts, you lose propulsion and catapults. It is a single point of failure. On the Ford, the electrical grid is zonal. If a missile hits the port side and knocks out a generator, the starboard side isolates itself instantly. The grid reroutes power in milliseconds. The ship can fight while half destroyed. However, the reliance on automation scares old sailors. If the Bush loses power, you can still turn valves by hand. You can still steer with a manual hydraulic pump. If the Ford loses its computer network, you can't open a door. You can't flush a toilet. You can't launch a plane. The Ford is a fly-by-wire ship. The Bush is a fly-by-cable ship. The cost is the elephant in the room. The USS George H.W. Bush cost $6.2 billion to build. The USS Gerald R. Ford cost $13.3 billion, and that doesn't include the $5 billion spent on research and development. You could build 2 Bush-class carriers for the price of one Ford. Is it worth it? The Navy argues yes. They say the Ford will save $4 billion in operating costs over its 50-year life because of the smaller crew and lower maintenance of the reactors. Critics argue no. They say the Ford is too complex, too fragile, and too expensive to lose. Veterans of the Bush talk about the soul of the ship, the smell of the steam oil, the vibration of the deck, the heat. It feels like a machine that lives and breathes. It requires constant attention. It builds a bond between the crew and the steel. Veterans of the Ford describe it as clinical. It is clean. It is quiet. The passageways are wider. The lighting is LED, not fluorescent. It feels like a hospital or a corporate office. The connection to the sea feels more distant. You are operating a computer that happens to be floating. The Bush uses parts that are available in any Navy warehouse. If a pump breaks, you can steal one from a decommissioned carrier or fly one in from Norfolk. The supply chain is robust. The Ford uses custom, one-of-a-kind parts. If a linear motor in the elevator breaks, you can't just get a spare. You have to call the manufacturer. The supply chain is still being built. This makes the Ford harder to sustain on a long deployment. During its first deployment, the Ford had tech representatives from General Atomics and Huntington Ingalls living on board to fix things. The Bush just needs its own crew. The USS George H.W. Bush is the ultimate expression of the industrial age. It is the peak of what can be done with steam and steel. It is reliable, powerful, and understandable. It is the ship you want if you have to fight a war today using technology you trust. The USS Gerald R. Ford is the first step into the information age. It is a platform designed for weapons that haven't been invented yet. It is faster, deadlier, and more efficient, but it is also temperamental. It requires a smarter crew, a cleaner environment, and a different mindset. The Bush is the heavyweight boxer who wins by brute force. The Ford is the MMA fighter who wins by speed and technique. As we look to the future, the Bush will eventually retire. The Ford class, with the JFK and Enterprise coming next, will become the standard. The steam era is ending. The magnetic era is beginning. But right now, both ships are prowling the oceans. And if you are an enemy of the United States, it doesn't matter if the jet was launched by steam or by magnets. The bomb it drops is exactly the same. If this Clash of the Titans sparked your interest in the engineering of naval warfare, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, subscribe to Tactical Chow. We don't just read the spec sheets, we tear them apart to show you the reality. Second, click the like button. It helps us battle the YouTube algorithm, which is tougher than a Nimitz Class hull. Third, leave a comment below. I want to know, if you were the captain, would you choose the proven reliability of the USS Bush or the cutting-edge power of the USS Ford? Steam or magnets? Cast your vote. And finally, if you think launching jets is intense, wait until you see the logistical nightmare of underway replenishment. Click the video on your screen right now to see how these massive ships refuel in the middle of a storm while moving at 20 knots. It is a dance with death. Click it and I'll see you there.